She came back the same way she left, without warning and without shame. One moment there was only the wind and the soft scrape of my broom against the porch. The next, she was there. My goddaughter. The girl who once called me her second mother. And later, left me with nothing but silence and empty drawers. I hadn't spoken her name in 15 years. I thought I had buried it, along with everything else she took. The afternoon light was thin, tired. The kind that blurs the edges between what was and what still hurts. The lilacs by the gate were in bloom again. I remember thinking how cruel beauty can be, returning each year as if nothing ever happened. My name is Ida. I was 63 when the past found its way back to my door, wearing her face. She stood there, holding a leather purse against her chest like a shield made of guilt and pride. Her hair, once the color of chestnuts, was streaked with silver now. The kind that doesn't come from age, but from consequence. Ida, she said. Just that. My name, trembling in her mouth like a confession too long rehearsed. There are moments that split a life in two, before and after. Seeing her again was one of them. I wanted to close the door. Instead, I opened the gate. Not because I forgave her, but because part of me still needed to understand why. The house smelled of chamomile and old wood, of quiet mornings that belonged to no one but time. She followed me in, her steps hesitant, as if each one might awaken the ghosts she left behind. I poured tea out of habit. The kettle hissed like it remembered, too. She sat at the table, her eyes scanning the room. The same curtains she once helped me sew, the piano that hadn't sung since she left. "You look well," she said. A lie, maybe, or an apology in disguise. I watched her hands as she reached for the cup. Gold rings, polished nails. She had done well for herself, at least for a time. "I didn't come for money," she said. And then again, softer, as if convincing herself, "I didn't come for money." I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only language the truth understands. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that their absence still has a voice. Stay with me. Because this story isn't about loss. It's about what the heart becomes when it finally lets go. She tried to meet my eyes, but hers were restless. They moved between the chipped porcelain and the window light, avoiding the place where forgiveness might live. "I couldn't carry it anymore," she whispered. The word had hung in the air like dust. I didn't ask what she meant. Some burdens don't need names. They just need witnesses. Outside, a crow called from the oak tree. I remember thinking how even the birds have better timing than regret. I studied her face. There was something hollow behind her beauty now, something fragile and frightened. The kind of emptiness that money can't fill. "I thought about you," she said. "I know," I answered. Not as kindness, but as truth. Those who betray never stop remembering the ones who made them whole. She looked down, twisting her ring. "I kept dreaming about this house. About the letter." My heart stopped for half a breath. The letter. I hadn't thought of it in years. It was the last thing I left for her before she vanished. A folded note inside the piano bench, written in the dark. A prayer disguised as surrender. "Everything you take," it said, "you will have to carry until it teaches you to give." When I wrote those words, I meant them as grace. But some truths become curses when they are not received in love. The light shifted across her face. In that moment, I saw both the girl she was and the woman she had become. Two mirrors facing each other, endlessly reflecting regret. "I lost everything," she said suddenly. "The house, the business, even Daniel. He left when the bank took what we had." Her voice cracked like glass, not from sorrow, but from exhaustion. She looked at me then, desperate, as if my gaze might undo the years she'd broken. "Maybe your blessing. Maybe it's still with me." Maybe if I came back, it could. She stopped. She didn't need to finish. I already knew. She was here not for forgiveness, but for magic. For the kind of mercy that rewrites fate. You can't unmake what's already become you, I said. She flinched, like the truth had found its way under her skin. Then what am I supposed to do? Live, I told her. But this time, live without stealing. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, the years between us disappeared. I saw the little girl again, barefoot in the orchard, bringing me wildflowers, believing the world owed her nothing but wonder. Something in me softened. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the smallest mercy of understanding. When she left that evening, the sun had turned the sky into bruised lavender. I stood by the door, watching her walk down the gravel path, her shadow stretching longer than her body, as if even it refused to follow her all the way. I thought that was the end. But endings, I've learned, often come dressed as beginnings. That night, I dreamed of her again. Young, laughing, holding a silver locket I once gave her at her baptism. She opened it, and inside there was nothing. Only light. When she looked at me in the dream, she said, "Whatever I took never belonged to me. It was yours all along." I woke with the faint scent of lilacs in the air, the kind that lingers even after the flowers are gone. There's a kind of memory that doesn't fade. It only grows quieter. You don't recall it on purpose. It returns on its own, like an echo that has learned to whisper. That's how she came back to me, first through dreams, then through the ache of remembering the girl she once was. Her name was Clara. I named her myself, though I wasn't her mother. Her mother, my sister's best friend, died when Clara was only 5. Her father followed a year later, swallowed by debts and despair. I was 48 then, a teacher who lived alone in a house too big for one life. When they asked if I could take the child, I said yes before the question was finished. It wasn't sacrifice, it was instinct, the kind that grows in women who have lost children of their own. The first night she slept in my house, she asked if she could keep the lamp on. "I'm afraid of silence," she said. I told her silence wasn't empty. It was where love went when words were too tired to speak. She didn't understand, but she smiled the way children do when they sense truth even without knowing it. That smile stayed with me for years. I thought it meant safety. Clara had a way of making ordinary things holy. She'd line up spoons on the table like soldiers, give names to stray cats, and talk to the wind as if it were an old friend returning from a long voyage. The house grew alive around her. Laughter became its language again. I taught her how to read using my mother's old Bible, how to bake bread, how to listen for rain before it fell. She called me Aunt Ida at first, then just Ida. Eventually, she stopped calling me anything. Not out of disrespect, but out of belonging. We were a family made not by blood, but by need. And sometimes, that kind of bond feels even deeper. There's a photograph I still keep on the mantle. Clara at 12, sitting by the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys, caught between childhood and the first notes of womanhood. That piano was my mother's. A gift from another life. The only inheritance that ever mattered to me. When Clara played, it was as if the house itself breathed differently, lighter, fuller, as though the walls remembered what joy sounded like. Sometimes after dinner, she'd ask me to tell her stories from my youth, about the time I almost married, about the man who left for sea and never came back. She'd listen with eyes wide open, as if my pain were a secret map leading her somewhere important. Looking back now, I see what I couldn't then. The way she measured affection like currency, the way her kindness had weight. Even as a child, she learned to give just enough to be adored, and to withdraw just enough to be missed. At the time, I mistook it for sensitivity, but it was something else. An early shadow, quiet and patient. I remember one summer afternoon, the heat thick as honey, the scent of jasmine and baking bread. We were in the garden, hanging laundry that fluttered like white flags of surrender. Clara asked, "If someone takes something from you but promises to bring it back, is that stealing?" I laughed, thinking it was another of her strange moral puzzles. "It depends," I said. "Do they bring it back?" She smiled, a smile too wise for a 13-year-old. "Sometimes they do," she said. "Sometimes they don't." I didn't ask what she meant. That was my mistake. Years went by. She grew into her beauty like a secret blooming too fast. At 16, she was taller than me, her hair falling down her back like dark silk. Boys came and went, farmhands, schoolmates, each of them leaving with the same bewildered expression, as if they had seen something they couldn't keep. She was kind, but not gentle, charming, but rarely soft. It was as though she had inherited my strength, but not my restraint. There's a story she loved, the one about the sparrow who tried to steal the sun. Every time I told it, she'd interrupt and say, "But maybe the sparrow only wanted to borrow the light." I didn't realize she was telling her own prophecy. When Clara turned 18, I gave her the silver locket from my mother's jewelry box. Inside, I placed a photograph, the two of us in the garden, holding hands, covered in flour from baking pies for the church fair. "It's yours," I told her, "so you never forget where you came from." She pressed it to her heart and whispered, "I won't." But promises are fragile things. They break quietly, like light slipping through cracked glass. If you've ever loved someone enough to ignore the warnings, you'll understand. Kindness, when given without discernment, can turn into inheritance. And sometimes, inheritance becomes burden. After she left for college, the house changed again. It grew still, its echoes deeper. I'd find her old letters tucked inside books, each signed with love that felt thinner every year. At first, she called every week, then every month, then only when she needed something, a loan, a signature, a favor that always sounded innocent. I told myself it was normal. That distance does this to people. But in truth, I could feel her drifting into a world where I no longer existed. One autumn morning, she came home unannounced. Her perfume entered before she did. Expensive, new, unrecognizable. "I got a job," she said. Her smile was polished, but her eyes were restless. She looked at the house like one looks at an antique. Beautiful, but outdated. She kissed my cheek and handed me a gift, a silk scarf, the color of wine. It wasn't my taste, but I wore it anyway. Later that night, as she slept in the guest room, I passed by and saw her silhouette against the moonlight. She was holding the silver locket, but she'd replaced the photo inside. Now it held her alone. Something in my chest tightened, a quiet fracture that hadn't yet learned its name. There's an ache that doesn't announce itself until it's too late. It begins as tenderness, a wish to believe the best in someone. And by the time you realize it's poison, you've already swallowed too much. When she left again, she hugged me longer than usual. "Thank you for everything," she said. The kind of goodbye that sounds like a promise, but feels like a premonition. I watched her walk down the road, her red coat bright against the gray sky. The wind caught her hair, and for a moment, she looked like that little girl again, running through the orchard, chasing light. I didn't know that would be the last time I'd see her before the betrayal. That night, I sat by the piano and opened the bench where I kept her old drawings, the tiny paper hearts she made on rainy days. Beneath them, I found one of her letters, unsigned, unfinished. It said, "Kindness runs in your blood, Ida. Maybe that's why I can't stop taking." I didn't understand it then, but I do now. Some blessings are too big for certain hearts to hold. It didn't begin with a slam of the door. It began with paper. Paper that smelled faintly of ink and lavender hand cream. Paper that folded neatly, that fit in envelopes and drawers and lives. Betrayal, I learned, prefers quiet mediums. Pens, keys, passwords, smiles. Clara returned in early spring when the rain wrote soft music on the roof and the plum tree pressed its white forehead against the kitchen window. She laughed at the mud on her boots, kissed the air near my cheek, and called me angel. That word used to make my ribs glow. Now it only moved around the dust. She unpacked small luxuries onto my table, imported tea, a tin of biscuits with blue flowers, a city magazine open to an article called The Shape of a Good Life. Her life, it seemed, had edges. Mine had rooms. "Let me help you," she said, gently scolding the cracked faucet and the tired stove. "You've carried me for years, Ida. Let me carry you." I told myself it was love evolving. I didn't hear the hinge creak on the door she was opening. The first form looked harmless. "A simple update," she said, sunlight dropping coins across the table. "Just your bank's contact details and a sign-in for me in case of emergencies. You live alone. What if you fall? What if you need transfers done? It's safer." I hesitated. She covered my hand with both of hers. Her fingers were warm, steady, persuasive, the way soft rain convinces a stone to change its shape. "I'm not taking anything," she said, a small, amused laugh. "I'm just creating a safety net. Our safety net. Our, the most expensive word in my vocabulary." I signed. Later, when she left to meet a friend, I cleaned the kitchen and found her perfume still swaying in the air. On the counter, beneath the tin of biscuits, lay a list. Neat, practical, property taxes, insurance renewal, old certificates to review, my name next to each item, her initials beside mine, little arrows tying us together like stitches. Stitches can close a wound. They can also repair the pocket of a thief. She was sweetness in motion that week. She replaced the light bulbs, tightened the loose porch rail, reorganized the file cabinet with new labels printed in a confident font. She knew where everything belonged, sometimes better than I did. On the third night, she poured wine and made a toast. "To women who don't apologize for surviving," she said. We clinked glasses, and I felt seen. I didn't know I was being studied. The first transfer was small, a test disguised as generosity. "I booked the chimney sweep," she announced, waving an invoice like a victory flag. "They were running a special. I paid up front from your account." "Oh, I should have asked." "But we'll reconcile it. It's all in the spreadsheet." She showed me the spreadsheet, tabs like rooms, numbers clean as hospital sheets. Reconcile, another soft word with hard teeth. I nodded. The chimney breathed better. So did I. A week later, she brought papers clipped with a gold pin. "I did something smart," she said, in the tone one uses with children and elderly saints. "I moved your savings into a higher yield account. Still yours, still accessible, just working a little harder for you." I smiled, a little embarrassed that I hadn't thought of it myself. I signed again, the way one blesses a ship they'll never board. I wish I could say I felt a tremor, a cold breath along the spine, a crow on a wire, cawing a warning only the guilty can hear. But the truth is simpler, more ordinary. I felt tired. I wanted help. I wanted to believe that love had finally returned to collect its interest in kindness. So I slept better. She slept down the hall. And the house, generous old thing, unlocked itself. The piano left on a Tuesday. I was at the grocer's, choosing pears just shy of ripe. The delivery men were polite. They used blankets under the legs, straps across the shoulders. They said, "Ma'am, and don't worry." When I came home, the room had a new echo. The space where music had once lived felt like a mouth missing a front tooth. "Temporary," Clara said, breathless from arranging flowers. The tuner needed it delivered to fix the soundboard. "He'll bring it back with a tone you won't believe. Trust me." Trust me, the little prayer of those who prepare your altar for a different God. I looked at her hands. No dirt, just perfume and certainty. The second absence was the jewelry box. Old velvet, stubborn clasp, my mother's initials inked inside. Gone from the drawer where it had sulked for years. "I moved it to the safe," she said, like a nurse reporting a heartbeat. "The bank's safe deposit. I added my signature too, for emergencies." I told myself this was wisdom. I didn't notice the quiet surrender filed under practicalities. Then came the papers that chirped like small birds until they learned to speak thunder. A refinanced policy, a line of credit for liquidity, a neat new will. Draft only, Ida. Nothing final, just structure. All managed by a young notary who called me dear and smelled like aftershave and ambition. "Everyone does this," Clara said, tapping the signature line. "It's modern stewardship." I held the pen. It felt heavier. "Why my house?" I asked, not fully understanding the question I was asking. "Because it's your largest asset," she said simply. "And because you have me." I signed. My name, still warm from my hand, lay down beside hers like a dog curling up at a stranger's feet. If you've ever wished for help so badly that you silence the small voice inside you, breathe with me here. What we ignore isn't dumb, it's tired. Betrayal walks in when discernment has gone to bed. The first overdraft notice arrived folded like a scolded child. I found it in the mailbox, wet around the edges from a light rain. I dried it carefully, as if compassion could change ink. "Clerical error," Clara said, annoyed on my behalf. "I'll call them. Banks punish the poor and the kind. You're neither." She laughed. I tried to. 2 days later, the notice was replaced by a courtesy call. The man on the phone had a voice like a new shirt. Crisp, never wrinkled. He asked for Clara. He did not ask for me. "Authorization," he explained kindly when I insisted. "Your niece is primary contact." "My goddaughter," I corrected, the word sounding suddenly unfamiliar, like a dress I hadn't worn in years. "Of course," he said unaltered. I handed the phone to Clara. She winked, soothed, handled, resolved. Then she made tea, and the crisis felt like a small headache you forget mid-afternoon. What disappeared next were the small things. Books I'd loved, now on loan to a friend who teaches literature. A painting with a chipped frame at the restorer's. The blue glass bowl I used for peaches. Broken? "I'm so sorry. I'll replace it, Ida. Don't be upset." Losses so minor they hardly seemed worth naming. But grief is a mathematician. It knows how small subtractions sum. When the men came for the antique armoire, I was home. They wore the same politeness as the piano men. They knew how to carry memory without bruising it. "Stop," I said, too softly for furniture. Clara stepped between us, a diplomat of inevitabilities. "The appraiser offered a fortune," she said, her voice ripe with reason. "It's better turning heirlooms into future. Let me manage this." "Whose future?" I asked. "Ours," she answered too quickly. The armoire slipped through the door like a secret leaving the mouth that had kept it. At night, lying in bed, I could hear the house rearranging itself in the dark. Spaces learning new names. Silences practicing a different echo. I began to dream of keys. Keys multiplying in bowls, in coats, in drawers. Keys opening doors I didn't know we owned. In one dream, Clara's hands were full of them. She laughed, and the keys turned to birds, and the birds flew into my chest and nested there. When I woke, my heart felt busy with something that wasn't mine. The reckoning arrived, polite as a calendar reminder. A letter from the county, property tax delinquent, intent to lien. I read it once, then again, the words refusing translation. I paid my property taxes the way I watered my plants, regularly, lovingly, a ritual of belonging. Clara was at the stove, stirring soup, singing along to a station that only knew choruses. "What is this?" I asked. She took the letter, skimmed, shrugged. "I restructured the payments when we refinanced. It's crossing in the mail." "We refinanced?" She kept stirring. Technical term, nothing changes but the shape. Of what? I whispered. Of obligation. The spoon clicked against the pot, and the sound felt like a small hammer tapping the side of my skull. The piano never came back. The tuner left a message I didn't hear until it was too late. We never received the instrument you mentioned. Perhaps another company. Then silence. A silence the size of a grand piano. I asked Clara. She frowned, offended by my panic. I sold it, she said finally, as if confessing to a kindness I was too unsophisticated to recognize. It was deteriorating value. Liquid. It serves us. Us, I repeated. The word tasted like old coins. You should have asked, I said. I did, she replied smoothly. You said, trust me. Memory, I learned, is an unreliable witness. It remembers feeling more than fact. I remembered wanting not to be alone in the heaviness of decision. I did not remember consent. I went to the bank without telling her. The lobby smelled like citrus and glass. A woman with perfect eyebrows and a necklace of tiny pearls examined her screen with the gentle concentration of a surgeon. Access is restricted, she said kindly. Primary is Miss Clara Vale. I am Miss Ida Marin, I said, placing my lifetime on the counter. The account is mine. Of course, she said again, that word fluttering like a white flag. But this power of attorney, see, gives her full discretion. The document slid toward me. My signature in its corner looked tired, like a face at the end of a long trip. Can this be undone? I asked. She tilted her head, compassion rehearsed. With both parties present, or through counsel. Counsel. Another room I didn't know how to enter. When I returned home, Clara had made coffee. She poured it into my favorite cup, the one with the crack that never leaked, and pushed it toward me like a peace offering. You went to the bank, she said, not a question. I did. I wish you'd trusted me, she murmured, eyes shining with wounded competence. You're safe with me, Ida. You always have been. Safe. The word translated in my body as still, the kind of stillness wolves love. The final blow did not arrive as violence. It arrived as the tidy woman who notarized the new deed. Her stamp came down with the soft thud of rain beginning. Clara smiled too brightly. This is strategy, she said. Tax efficiency, asset protection. One day, if something happens to you, I won't need courts to keep your house safe. It stays in the family. In the family. I thought of my mother's hands on that piano, my father's jacket folded forever on the hook, the tiny pencil marks on the pantry wall where children I didn't bear still grew. Family, to me, was a verb. To Clara, it was a vault. I held the pen and felt the weight of air. My name trembled. Clara's hand hovered over mine, steadying. Breathe, she whispered. Trust. I signed. 2 weeks later, the house was no longer mine. Not in the way paper understands. Paper, it turns out, believes whatever hand feeds it. I learned this when the notice arrived. Transfer recorded. Title updated. A copy went to Clara's new address. An address I did not know she had. I stood in the hallway where the light falls like water on late afternoons and felt something tilt inside me. The world grew slanted. I held the wall as if it were the last honest thing left standing. I didn't scream. Shame is a silencer. So is love that doesn't know how to admit it has been made a fool. I packed a small bag the way one prepares for hospital surgery. With dignity, with clean socks, with the hope that afterward the body will still belong to you. I left her a note, placed where the piano used to be. The hollow there was perfect for hurt. Clara, everything you took, you will carry until it teaches you to give. I meant this once as mercy. Today, it is the only truth I have left. Ida. I locked the door behind me, though the lock understood it was a courtesy. Where does a woman go when her name has been erased from the deed of her own life? I went to the church I rarely attended, a stone building that held old hymns like breath. I lit a candle for my mother, then one for Clara, then one for the house. The wax bent. The flames answered no questions. But in the quiet, something living moved toward me. Not God, not absolution, just a small, stubborn dignity that rises in women who have been emptied and still stand. I sat in the back pew until the custodian coughed politely and jingled his keys. Keys. Always keys. Outside, the evening smelled like wet soil. I walked home. I didn't know what I would do when I got there. Only that I would not beg. Clara was waiting on the porch, her face pale with fury and exhaustion. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "You frightened me." I looked at her, at the girl who had once braided my hair with clumsy devotion, at the woman who now braided paperwork with mastery. "This is my house," I said. "It is our house," she corrected, that small correction where theft finishes putting on its lipstick. She opened her mouth to say more, then closed it. The wind lifted her hair. For a brief second, she looked terrified, the mask cracking, the soul blinking in raw light. "What do you want, Ida?" she whispered. I surprised us both. "Nothing," I said. "I want nothing from you." She stared at me as if I had spoken a language no one had ever taught her. "People want," she said finally. "They always want." "I don't," I answered, and in that moment it was true. Want had burned itself out. Only will remained. That night, I did not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of water I did not drink and listened to the house adjusting to its new owner. Floorboards sighed. Pipes clicked. Somewhere in the attic, a mouse wrote its tiny history. Near dawn, the birds decided to forgive the world for whatever it had done while they were dreaming. They sang. I put on my coat. I left without a suitcase. I took only one thing. My mother's rosary, which had survived by being too ordinary to list. On the gate, a ribbon I'd tied for luck years ago had bleached to the color of bones. I touched it, then let it go. If your story rhymes with mine, you know this part, the walk you make with empty hands. It is the heaviest walk, and also the lightest. You do not yet know that letting go is a tool. You only know you have nothing left to grip. I moved into a small room over the seamstress's shop on Maple Street. The window faced east. Mornings came early and unasked for, like advice from a friend who loves you enough to risk your temper. The seamstress, a widow named Blanca, taught me to mend in ways that clothes understand. We drank coffee standing up. We spoke little. Grief appreciates economies. At dusk, I walked. I passed houses holding children and dinners and televisions glowing like captive moons. I wondered if the house knew I was still on its street, breathing its air, refusing to haunt it. Clara called. I didn't answer. I let her words pile up on the machine like leaves. Worry, apology, justification, strategy, outrage, guilt, fatigue, then silence. 3 weeks later, a letter slid beneath the shop door with my name in her old, careful handwriting. Inside, a check. Large, no note. I tore it in half, then into quarters, then into the snow of smaller and smaller reasons. Money is a language. So is refusal. The town rallied the way small places do, with casseroles, with rides, with the fierce privacy of people who have seen worse and chosen to keep loving anyway. Someone told me the piano had reappeared in a restaurant 2 counties over. Someone else said the armoire was on an auction site, modeled by a girl who smiled with all her teeth. I bought a notebook and began to write. Not a diary, an inventory. Not of what was missing, of what remained. Page 1. 2 good hands, a back that still carries groceries, a name no paper can take from me. Breath. Lilac in spring. Light. And then, one morning, the first true turning approached like weather. Slow, inevitable, deciding the shape of the afternoon long before clouds confessed it. A letter, again. But this time not from banks or county offices or Clara's careful pen. From a law firm with a name like granite. Inside, a notice. Fraud investigation initiated. Miss Clara Vale under review for multiple irregularities across accounts. In the margin, handwritten, you may be contacted as a witness. Witness. Not victim, not owner. Witness. The word rested on my tongue and did not melt. I stood by the window and watched a scrap of white cloth catch on the branch of the plum tree. It fluttered like surrender, and also like a flag. I could not tell which. Maybe both. Maybe that's what happens when blessing begins to turn. The letter from the law firm sat on my table for 3 days before I opened it. 3 mornings of pouring coffee beside it, pretending it was something else. An old bill, a misplaced receipt, a shadow I could ignore. When I finally tore it open, the words didn't scream. They whispered. Fraud investigation. Witness. Assets under review. I ran my finger along the edge of the paper. It felt cold, metallic. There's a kind of truth that doesn't wound. It empties. And in that emptiness, something new begins to move. For a while, I thought about revenge. Not the kind that destroys, but the quiet satisfaction of seeing justice performed by clean hands. The world would call that balance. But balance, I've learned, is not always peace. Each night I sat by the small window above the seamstress's shop, listening to the traffic hum below like a tired hymn. Clara's face would appear in the glass, not as she was, but as she had been. The child with soil on her knees, the girl who once asked if borrowing could become stealing. I didn't hate her. That surprised me. Hate is too active. It needs tending, feeding, conversation. I had no energy left for that. What I felt was something quieter, like the tide pulling back from the shore. One evening, Blanca, the seamstress, brought me a letter. It was from the parish. Father Mateo wanted help organizing a charity auction for the orphanage. Music program, he said in the note. They need instruments. Old ones, new ones, anything with strings or keys. I almost laughed. The irony was sharp, but not cruel. My piano, the one Clara sold, might soon have children's fingerprints on its surface again. Somewhere in a hall where laughter echoes more kindly. That night, I dreamt of the piano. It stood in a bright room with tall windows. Children circled it, their laughter shaping light into notes I couldn't name. And Clara was there too, watching from a distance, her eyes full of salt water. When I woke, I knew what I had to do. At dawn, I wrote a letter. Not to Clara, to the lawyer. I declined to testify. I declined restitution. And I asked that whatever portion of my claim remained unspent be donated to the Children's Music Fund in the parish ledger. The words flowed easily, not as surrender, but as release. I wasn't forgiving her. I was untying myself from the rope we were both choking on. I signed the letter and sealed it with wax, a small ritual of closure. I placed it under the morning sun until the red seal hardened like dried blood. When I walked to the post office, the air smelled of rain and bread. Life, I thought, always continues its little chores. A dog barked, a child called to her mother, and for the first time in months, I felt part of that small, ordinary rhythm. At the corner, I met Father Mateo. He carried boxes of sheet music under one arm, the pages trembling like wings. "Ida," he said, smiling, "I heard about your generosity." "It's nothing," I replied. But even as I said it, something inside me whispered, "It is everything." That night, I lit a candle, not for Clara, for the woman I had been. I placed the rosary beside it, each bead holding the echo of hands long gone. My mother's, mine, perhaps one day another's. I prayed without words, Not for justice, not for return, only for rightness, the quiet alignment of spirit and truth. When I opened my eyes, I felt lighter. Not happier, not yet, but free in a way that didn't depend on circumstance. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was Father Mateo again. His voice carried a kind of awe. "Your donation arrived just in time," he said. "A local musician offered to restore 3 old instruments for the children. They start lessons next week." "That's wonderful," I said softly. He hesitated. "There's something else. The piano arrived today." I froze. "The piano?" "Yes, delivered anonymously. No record of purchase. But the movers said it came with a note, unsigned." He read it aloud. "For the hands that still believe sound can heal what words cannot." I sat there, phone pressed against my cheek, listening to the hum of the line. Somewhere between justice and grace, the universe had answered in its own language. Was it Clara? Was it the law? Was it something else, older and invisible, balancing a scale beyond my reach? I didn't know. I didn't need to. That night I walked to the church. The doors were open. The piano sat near the altar, its wood glowing in candlelight, keys pale as the inside of seashells. I touched it once. The way one touches the cheek of a loved one returned from a long illness. It was warm. I pressed a single key. The note that rose wasn't perfect. It wavered, fragile, like a confession carried through the wind. But it was alive. I sat on the bench, and I played. Not for Clara, not for forgiveness, for the simple miracle that music still existed. If you've ever released someone who never said they were sorry, you know this piece. It's not sweet. It's not loud. It's the kind that hums quietly in your bones, reminding you that the soul doesn't keep score. It breathes again. Weeks passed. Spring unfurled its green promises, and life began weaving itself back into the corners of my days. One morning, Blanca handed me a small parcel. No sender, no note. Just a box wrapped in faded blue paper. Inside, the silver locket, the one I'd given Clara years ago. It was clean, polished, empty. No photo, no explanation, only a faint scent of lilac. I held it in my palm until my heartbeat slowed. Then I smiled. The circle had closed, not in revenge, not in punishment, but in return. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the roofs, I placed the locket on the church piano, beside a small vase of white flowers, a gesture so quiet that even the air seemed to bow around it. It was not mine anymore. It was not hers either. It belonged to whatever mercy had found its way through us both. Change rarely announces itself with thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a small, precise silence. A cup set down more gently than usual. A key that hesitates in a lock it has opened 1,000 times. A name that does not answer when called. That is how the turning began. Not with punishment. With pause. The day after I placed the locket on the church piano, the town seemed to stand a heartbeat taller. Light gathered on windowsills like patient birds. Children passed by the seamstress shop carrying recorders and tiny violins, the cases too big for their thin shoulders. They were proud of their burden. Blanca smiled as she basted a hem. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "The way the air has changed?" I listened. It sounded like a promise replaying itself until it learned the right key. Then the first rumor reached Maple Street. Not mean, not eager, just inevitable. Clara's business had taken a sudden stumble. A partner withdrew. A lease evaporated. Numbers that once obeyed her now stood apart with folded arms, refusing to add up. I made tea and stood by the window. On the sill sat a sprig of lilac, gone almost white as it dried. I did not rejoice, but neither did I drown in the old ache. A blessing, if it is true, does not circle back to punish. It circles back to balance. On a Tuesday I will remember longer than birthdays. I went to the parish for the first children's class. They set the piano near the side chapel, where candles whisper their little gold languages. The teacher, a young woman with kind wrists, tapped a rhythm on the lid and asked the children to echo. Claps, giggles, the solemn attempt of a boy who wanted so badly to be right that he forgot to breathe. I sat in a second-row chair and closed my eyes. Every mistake sounded holy. Every correction sounded like love. Later, the teacher asked if I would play something short, just to show the children how music can be a room that welcomes what words leave on the doorstep. I touched the keys the way one touches a hand reconciled after cold months. A simple hymn, nothing showy. It rose and fell like bread. When I finished, I turned and saw a figure at the door. Clara. She stood very still, as if the air were crowded with things she did not know how to carry. Our eyes met. Her mouth trembled, but no sound came. She left before the hymn had fully returned to silence. I blessed that silence. It knew more than I did. After that day, the town began to produce her name in smaller voices. Not gossip. Gravity. A supplier filed a complaint. A bank froze a line she had considered permanent as breath. An assistant left with a polite note and an apology written around a secret. Clara tried to keep moving. She dressed even more beautifully, as if fabric could complete a sentence life had abandoned. She answered calls with a brightness that broke at the edges. She stood very tall in rooms that were getting shorter. At night, she drove the long way home past the church. She did not come in, but sometimes she parked across the street and watched the candle glow. The turning continued. One afternoon near closing, I found her waiting by the shop door. No perfume, no lipstick armor. She held a paper bag like a talisman, fingers gone white at the knuckles from keeping it together. "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She moved through the doorway as if it hurt. Blanca looked up, nodded once, and disappeared into the back room. Bless the women who know when a room wants only 2 breaths in it. Clara set the bag on the table. Inside lay a stack of documents bound with twine. The twine shook. "I tried to fix it," she said. "The house, the accounts, everything. I kept thinking if I just did more, called more, sold more, I could climb out of the hole I dug." She looked at her hands. They were unadorned, no rings to signal immunity. "When did the hole begin?" I asked. She thought for a long time. "Maybe it began the day people smiled at me for a thing I did not earn," she said. "Or maybe it began the first time I believed I could borrow light without owing anyone a shadow." Her voice thinned. I returned the piano. "I know," I said, "and the locket." "I know," I said again, quietly. She looked relieved and ruined at once. "How do you know?" she asked. "I do not," I answered, "in the way numbers know. I know the way rain knows where to land." Clara pressed her palms flat on the table. "I wake to music that has no source," she whispered. "It is not a melody. It is a mercy. It makes me want to change my life and also hide inside it." I said nothing. Stillness is a teacher that dislikes interruptions. The law sent another letter. This time, not to me, to Clara. She brought it over unopened, like a child carrying a jar with something alive inside. "Read it," she asked, and the request felt like a confession. I broke the seal. The words were serious but not cruel. Restitution plan, mediation, an accountant assigned to unwind the knots. A line that said, "Cooperation will be seen as character." Clara began to cry without sound. Tears fell in the pattern of prayers. "I thought curse meant suffering," she said. "I thought blessing meant ease. But this," she touched the letter, "feels like a mirror that does not look away. Is that what your blessing did to me?" "No," I said gently. "My blessing unhooked my name from your taking. What you feel now is the house of your life asking for honest weight on its beams." She closed her eyes. "I am afraid they will take everything." "They might," I said. And then you will learn what everything is not. She laughed once, raw and aching. Who taught you to speak like that? Loss, I said, and the piano. That evening, after Clara left with the letter folded into her coat like a fragile bird, Blanca returned from the back room carrying 2 cups. You did not absolve her, she said, handing me the warmer one. You did not condemn her. I am learning the middle, I answered. Blanca sipped. Most people fear the middle because it has no banners, but it has a door. What is behind it? I asked. Work, she said simply, and breath. Little things kept changing in ways only the soul counts. A neighbor returned a book I had forgotten I owned. The seamstress shop received a large order from a woman who paid extra just to say thank you. On market day, an old man I barely knew pressed a ripe peach into my hand and said, "For your music." None of it made me rich. All of it made me wealthy. At night, I wrote again in the inventory notebook. Not lost. Remaining. I added, a town that still recognizes itself when it passes a mirror. I added, a heart that no longer negotiates with hunger. Clara began to attend the parish from the back pew, where angels are formed from regret into resolve. She did not take communion. She did not ask for counsel. She breathed. On a rain-polished Sunday, I watched her watch the children line up for lessons. She was careful with her looking, as if her eyes were learning a new language with fewer demands. After class, she approached the teacher and offered to tune the small violins once a month. I do not play, she admitted, but I am good with tasks that love repetition. Repetition, done properly, is prayer. The teacher smiled, thanked her, wrote her name on a small card as if it were a seed. The turning revealed itself most clearly on the day the accountant called. Not to threaten, to ask a question. Where did the funds from the armoire sale go? The accountant asked, kind but exact. Clara closed her eyes. They went to keep something that did not want to be kept. What was that? The accountant asked. My life, Clara whispered. There was a silence on the line that felt like the beginning of respect. Let us make a new one, the accountant said. That wants you back. We met at the church steps one evening when the sky had the color of linen. Clara carried a long envelope and a bouquet she did not quite know how to hold, wildflowers that refused to arrange themselves. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a deed, not back to the house, not yet, to a strip of land behind it, where the old pear tree used to lean like a tired elder. I cannot return what paper believes entirely, she said. Not this moment. But I can begin the undoing. And this, she lifted the bouquet, cheeks coloring with a humility I recognized from my own mirror, is for the bench where the piano rests. There should be flowers there that have not been bought with sorrow. We stood with the awkwardness of people who have hurt each other and chosen not to make a monument out of it. A breeze passed between us, carrying the kind of cool that knows summer's ending. Will you come inside? I asked. Not yet, she said softly. Not until I can come through the door with nothing in my pockets but my hands. I nodded. A boundary that honors both sides is a bridge. That night, the dream returned. This time the locket opened and there was not only light, but an image forming inside it, slow as dawn. A child's hand, smudged with graphite. Learning to draw a circle that closes itself without force. When I woke, I understood. The blessing was not an arrow pointing away from her. It was a circle including us both, asking each of us to stand in our right place. If your heart is here with me, in this quiet turning, I want you to hear this. You do not need to call it justice to let it steady you. You do not need to call it forgiveness to let it loosen your fists. If this story is opening a window inside you, leave a trace below, a line, a word, a breath. Sometimes sharing is how the soul confirms it is still listening. The town moved forward in its unremarkable way. Children practiced until the wrong notes grew tender and then brave. The seamstress completed a wedding dress, sent it out in a box with a ribbon that understood ceremony. I learned a new hymn that kept trying to lift my hands. Clara's company became smaller on purpose. She closed offices that had become trophies. She kept a desk near a window that saw the river. She began to take the bus and discovered that public time teaches private humility. She called once to tell me she had returned the last unearned thing she could find. "What was it?" I asked. "My silence," she answered. I told the truth to someone who could use it. I did not ask for details. Sometimes the specifics steal the power from a vow. On an evening that smelled faintly of pears and dust, I walked past the house. I do not know whether it will always be hers, always be mine, always be ours, or belong to whatever lineage of breath moves through families that choose each other and then have to learn that choosing again is harder. The curtains were open. No one stood at the window. In the yard, something small gleamed. A key. Plain brass. No tag. I picked it up and turned it in my hand. It did not match any lock I knew. I could have kept it. I could have dropped it. Instead, I placed it on the porch rail where morning would find it. Not everything that shines asks to be owned. When I reached the church, the door was unlocked. Inside, the piano waited like a friend who remembers your coffee order and your reasons for refusing sugar. I sat and placed my hands on the keys. Before I played, I noticed a new object on the bench. A small folded piece of paper. I opened it. In Clara's careful hand, "I will spend the next years returning what cannot be boxed or banked. If you ever want me to leave this town, I will go. If you ever want me to stay, I will learn how to stand rightly in the doorway. Thank you for not making my curse your name." I placed the note under the locket. I began to play. Something old. Something that knows how to walk beside people who have stopped running. Halfway through, I felt it again. That slight shift in the air when a weight has been set down where it belongs. The note steadied. My hands did not shake. The room exhaled. The turning had turned, not all at once, not in a way a judge could stamp, but enough that even the shadows learned a new posture. Outside, the evening gathered itself without hurry. I stepped into it as if into a bath drawn by someone who loves me. On the far side of the square, I saw Clara pause, look up, and raise her hand in a greeting that did not insist. I raised mine. 2 small human gestures. Enough. Behind her, a child crossed the street with a violin case knocking lightly against a knee. The case was scuffed. The child was not. I walked home by the long road, which is the shortest when you have nothing to chase. The seamstress shop smelled like warmed cotton and a future that has chosen not to hurry. I washed my hands. I wrote 2 lines in the notebook. Remaining, a life that belongs to itself. Remaining, a door that opens when it should and closes without drama when it must. I put out the light. The room held me. The night did not ask me for anything I did not have. It began quietly, as all unravelings do. No trumpet, no thunder. Only the sound of a woman discovering that her reflection no longer obeys her. I heard it first from Blanca. She'd gone to the market early and returned with whispers in her basket. The kind of whispers that carry both pity and inevitability. "Clara's company has closed," she said. "Some say bankruptcy, others say mercy." I nodded. The world has its own vocabulary for endings. But in my bones, I knew this was not the end. Only the beginning of something else choosing its shape. Days later, I saw her again. At the post office this time, her hair unkempt, her hands bare. She stood in line behind me but didn't speak. When our eyes met, she smiled in apology or exhaustion. I couldn't tell which. Her body looked smaller, as if the architecture of her certainty had collapsed. I wanted to reach out, but my hands stayed still. Some kindnesses, if given too soon, steal a person's last chance to meet themselves. When I stepped outside, I watched her through the window. She was filling out a form. Her pen trembled slightly, like a bird uncertain if it can still fly. That evening, the sky wept a fine, deliberate rain. I walked home without an umbrella, feeling the water stitch new courage into my skin. Each drop a small absolution. When I arrived, a parcel waited by the door, wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. No note. Inside, a leather journal, soft at the corners, and a key. I recognized the key first. It belonged to the house. The lock I no longer owned, the door I no longer opened. The journal smelled faintly of her perfume, and something else. Fear, perhaps, or surrender. I didn't plan to read it, but the first page was already open. Ink had bled through where the pen had lingered too long on a word. I dreamed of the house again. But the rooms were smaller, as if shrinking to match the size of my truth. The mirrors were kind. Too kind. They showed me not as a thief, but as a woman rearranging her loneliness. When I woke, I felt the same hunger that used to make me brilliant. Only now, it tastes like salt. I closed the book. My hands were shaking. There's something unsettling about reading another person's conscience when it's still alive inside them. But I couldn't stop. Every night, I hear the piano. The same hymn over and over, like a wound practicing forgiveness. I moved apartments, changed walls, changed beds. But it follows. It plays when I try to sleep, when I shower, when I lie about being fine. It never plays wrong notes. Maybe that's what hurts most. The words looked pressed, not written. As if she had forced them out, hoping to exercise what she couldn't name. I read on. I went to the house yesterday. It doesn't know me. The new tenants planted hydrangeas where the lilacs used to grow. I touched the gate, and it felt like touching a memory that refuses to age with you. I didn't go inside. I wouldn't have recognized myself there either. I set the journal down and stepped away. The air in my small room felt heavier. Not with guilt, but with compassion, trying to breathe in tight spaces. Clara was unraveling, not because of poverty, but because truth had finally found her exact size. The next day, she appeared at the parish, her face thinner, her eyes clearer. Father Matteo told me later she had come to volunteer, sorting donations, cleaning, doing small tasks no one noticed, but everyone benefited from. She works quietly, he said, like someone paying a debt to silence. He didn't ask who she was to me. He didn't need to. Some relationships explain themselves simply by the way air changes when the names are spoken. That night, I opened the journal again. Near the end, one last entry. The handwriting was uneven, urgent, like someone trying to write faster than her own realization. I used to think punishment was pain, but real punishment is clarity. It's seeing, finally, the exact value of what you traded for comfort, and knowing it will never be on sale again. The curse isn't Ida's letter. It isn't the law. It's the echo. The echo of a woman who gave and kept giving until I mistook her abundance for endlessness. When she blessed me, she didn't damn me. She handed me the mirror I had avoided my whole life. Tonight I lit a candle for her. It flickered 3 times before steadying. Maybe that was her answer. Maybe it was mine. I sat in the dark after reading. The candlelight shivered against the walls, and for the first time, I felt something break open inside me. Not sadness, not pride. Recognition. The curse had finished its work, not by destroying her, but by returning her to the truth. Weeks passed. The journal stayed on my table, open to different pages each morning, as if the wind wanted to remind me that repentance is also a living thing. One afternoon, Clara knocked on my door. Not the house, my small room above the shop. I opened it. She stood there holding nothing but her hands. "I came to return the key in person," she said softly. "I thought you'd thrown it away," I said. "I did," she whispered. "It found me again." She placed it on the table between us. The metal glinted like memory turning into mercy. "Are you angry I read the journal?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "I left it for you. I wanted you to know that the blessing worked, just not the way I imagined." We sat for a while, saying nothing. Some silences are not awkward. They are altars. She told me she was moving, not far, just away from the echoes. "Maybe to the coast," she said. "I want to hear a sound older than my own mistakes." I wished her well, not politely, sincerely, because now, wishing her well no longer cost me peace. Before she left, she said something that stayed with me long after the door closed. "You were right, Ida. You can't unmake what's become you, but you can unlearn the hunger that made you steal in the first place." Then she was gone. That night, I walked to the church. The moon was high and merciful. Inside, the piano waited, its shadow stretching across the floor like a familiar ache. I placed the key and the journal beside the locket. 3 relics of a story that had finally found its last breath. I lit a candle. The flame burned steady. No flicker, no hesitation. If you've ever watched someone's downfall and felt both sorrow and peace, you'll understand this part. It's not cruelty. It's witnessing a soul remember its own handwriting. Sometimes love finishes its work by leaving you with nothing left to forgive. The next morning, a letter arrived. From Clara. No envelope, just folded paper, clean and deliberate. Ida. You once wrote that everything I took I would carry until it taught me to give. I have carried enough. Now I am learning to give back what cannot be held. Silence, humility, truth. I hope one day you'll play the piano and think not of betrayal, but of balance. Wherever I am, I'll be listening. Clara. I folded the letter and placed it inside my notebook. Then I wrote, under remaining, the sound of mercy learning my name. There is a way a road remembers your feet, even after years, even after you swear you won't walk it again. It waits with its small, stubborn stones and its unrushed dust, as if to say, when you are ready, I will carry you without questions. I woke before the birds, made coffee I did not finish, and stood at the window until the dark learned my face. In the drawer lay the inventory notebook. I opened to the last page and found the line I had written the night before. Remaining. A door that opens when it should, and closes without drama when it must. I closed the notebook. I put on my blue coat, the one that knows how to behave in weather and in memory, and I walked. Dawn gathered itself slowly over Maple Street. The seamstress shop exhaled its familiar breath of cotton and quiet. Blanca had left an elastic band on the counter, the kind she loops around bundles of finished work. I slipped it onto my wrist, a small reminder that things can be held together without being strangled. By the time I turned the corner, the town had remembered how to be awake. A bicycle bell, a screen door, a dog arguing with possibility, and then the house. I did not rush the last steps. I let them arrive in me the way a tide receives the moon, on time, without argument. The lilacs were not in bloom. It was not their season. But the leaves held a color that understood promise. The ribbon on the gate, once bleached to bone, had been replaced. Soft green, a shade that knows how to stay even when it is quiet. I rested my hand on the gate. The wood felt warm, as if the night had kept it for me. I did not open it. Return, I have learned, is not always entrance. Sometimes it is standing where a story once swallowed you and choosing to keep your name. I stood there long enough for the sky to confess its blue. Long enough for the mailman to tip his cap without stopping. Long enough to hear the hum of a refrigerator from inside, a domestic hymn, ordinary and holy. Through the window I saw a woman, not me, carry a basket of laundry down the hall. A child crossed behind her, a paper crown tilted on a brave head. They were not ghosts sent to taunt me. They were proof that houses are instruments. They learn the song of whoever plays them. A swallow darted from the eave and wrote something careless in the air. I smiled. I had not come to reclaim. I had come to bless. Be kind to them, I whispered, palm still on the gate. And be kind to the part of me that still breathes in your walls. The wind lifted. Somewhere in the yard, an unattended bell answered with a single, surprised note. I did not walk away. Not yet. I reached into my coat pocket and found the small things I had carried without knowing. A folded scrap of staff paper from the parish piano, the elastic band from Blanca's counter, and a tiny vial of garden soil Father Mateo had pressed into my hand 2 days before, laughing. Even miracles like roots, he'd said. On the outer post of the gate, I tied the elastic band in a simple knot. I slipped the staff paper beneath it, the lined page fluttering just enough to insist it had music in it already. Then I touched the vial to the sill and let 3 grains fall. Not to claim the ground, but to greet it. A ritual should be small enough to fit inside a breath. Mine did. Thank you, I said, and meant it so thoroughly it emptied me in a clean way. I turned. I walked toward the church. The parish doors were open to air and to footsteps. Candles quivered their careful gold. The piano waited with the patient dignity of a friend who never keeps score. On the bench rested the locket, the key, and the journal. 3 relics, 3 lessons, 3 old weights that no longer needed to be carried. I sat and let my hands find their places on the keys. Before I played, I placed the notebook beside the locket and opened to a clean page. Title, Return. Under it I wrote, not to claim, not to be claimed, to belong without owning. I closed my eyes and began. A hymn that knew the road home. No flourishes, no argument. Just the slow honesty of notes placed where they can do their work. Halfway through, the side door opened. I didn't turn. I knew the footfall. Not because I had memorized it, but because my body no longer feared it. Clara did not sit. She stood near the candles, hands at her sides. When the hymn found its last soft place to rest, she walked forward and set something on the bench. A small clay bell, unglazed, humble, a cord threaded through its throat. From the market, she said, voice steady and unadorned. They let you tune it yourself. I tapped it with a fingertip. A clear, clean sound. Not loud, not shy. Exactly itself. Thank you, I said. She nodded, gaze on the keys, the way someone averts their eyes in a holy place. I am leaving tomorrow, she added. By the coast, a room above a bakery, work I can do with my hands and my word. Good, I said. And I meant that word in its oldest sense, as in aligned. She took a breath that seemed to surprise her by how fully it entered her. I came to ask for nothing, she continued, and to return something that cannot be placed on a bench. She paused, as if trying to find vowels sturdy enough for what she carried. My wanting, she said finally, the kind that turns love into a mouth that never closes. We both stood still in that sentence until it finished settling. I accept, I said gently, not as a gift to me, as a promise to yourself. She lowered her head and I watched a quiet relief unfasten itself in her shoulders. You owe me nothing, Clara, I added. Return what you can to the world. That will be plenty. For the first time since the day she arrived with a purse full of confidence and plans, she smiled like a girl in an orchard, empty-handed and free. She left without another word. The door caught and then consented to close. I sat again. I touched the clay bell once, letting its sound tell the room that something had ended without ceremony and therefore correctly. Then I played. This time, not a hymn. Something without a name, the kind of piece made only of what remains. The recital for the children took place on a Saturday bold with sun. Parents, grandparents, and those undecided between the two crowded the pews. Blanca wore a dress with tiny blue flowers that insisted she had always been somebody's beloved, even when she forgot. The first boy marched to the front with a violin case that banged his knee like a reminder to laugh at himself. He played 3 brave notes and 2 honest mistakes. The church applauded both outcomes. That is how communities vote for a future. A little girl in a yellow sweater climbed onto the piano bench and looked back at me for courage. I nodded. She began a piece called Light on Water, which is simply scales that have learned to tell a story. When she finished, I whispered to her, "Do you know what you just did?" She shook her head, big eyes ready for correction. "You turned breath into music," I said, "and you didn't even break a sweat." She laughed so hard the clay bell on the bench shivered. Between pieces, I saw Clara standing at the back with a small toolkit. She checked pegs, rubbed a bow with resin, retied a strap. Nothing dramatic. The work that keeps music possible. At the end, the teacher asked if I would say a few words. I stood where a microphone might have been if we believed we needed to be louder. "Thank you for bringing your children," I said. "Thank you for letting imperfect notes mean that courage is alive in your house." I paused, listening for the sentence that was waiting its turn. "And if there is anyone here," I added, "who has lost more than they thought they could live without, I want you to know. The heart is a room with more windows than doors. It is built to let the weather pass through without removing the foundations." The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with people remembering who they were before fear taught them its grammar. We clapped for one another, which is to say, we promised to show up again. After the church emptied, I stayed to clean wax strips and collect forgotten programs. On the bench, the locket rested open. Light. No image this time. Only a bright, blank readiness. I took the inventory notebook from my bag and wrote, "Remaining, permission." I closed it and set it under the locket, the way you place a pillow under a sleeping child's head. Father Mateo entered carrying a broom that had learned patience. "You look taller," he said, sweeping the aisle with a dignity brooms always hoped for. "Maybe my shame fell out of my pockets," I replied. He leaned the broom against the pew and took my hand the way priests sometimes remember they are brothers first. "Whatever ritual you did," he said, "do it again. This town is breathing better." "I only stopped arguing with the truth," I said. "Ah," he smiled. "The only ritual that never runs out of candles." Evening came wearing a soft jacket. The air smelled like bread and something citrus. The seamstress shop window reflected me. Not younger, not older, right-sized. On the work table, Blanca had left a small package tied with thread. Inside, a set of linen napkins she'd sewn from remnants, each corner stitched with a single letter. I. Not a monogram that shouts, just a reminder that identity is a quiet craft. There was also a note. "You return to yourself. The house will catch up in its own time. B." I pressed the napkins to my face and laughed alone in a way that did not feel lonely. That night, I dreamed of the house one last time. It was taller than memory and shorter than grief. The rooms had rearranged themselves to suit a family I did not know and did not need to envy. In the kitchen, a child with ink on her fingers wrote the first bars of a song on staff paper. Through the window, lilac leaves practiced patience. Clara stood at the gate, one hand resting on the post where the staff paper now hung beneath a simple green band. She touched the paper, read nothing, and smiled the kind of smile that belongs to people who have decided to pay their debts to the living. When I woke, I knew I would sleep again without bargaining. I returned to the parish and placed the clay bell on a thin ribbon above the piano. When the door opened and closed, it answered softly, A reminder that entrances and exits are not opposites. They are chords. I took the locket, closed it gently, and slipped it into a small drawer on the side of the bench where spare pencils live and children hide their bravery. Not to lock it away, to let it listen. Then I sat and played the smallest piece I know. 4 notes that make a square you can step into when you are tired of circles. It sounded like a porch in evening light. It sounded like a woman who survived her own story and did not turn it into a weapon. When the last note settled, I whispered, "I am home." The room believed me. If you found yourself somewhere inside these echoes, leave a trace below. A word, a memory, a breath. Sometimes writing it down is how we return without knocking. And if you want to walk more roads like this with me, subscribe. Quiet stories travel far when we carry them together. If this story steadying your heart might steady someone else's, share it. Mercy multiplies when we give it away.